Hi. Welcome back. Before the video begins, make sure and hit subscribe and the notification bell. Thank you. Alright, so today I'll be talking about the oceans, facts about planet Earth's water. The main water system, which flows through the continents and provides life and feeds into everything, such as the weather systems and how everything functions and ultimately links together. So, I wrote down a long list of compiled research and information, and I will be doing some drawings from time to time to give you a better visual idea of these facts, because just how I did in my Facts of Outer Space video, I don't like just listening. I have to see the thing I'm learning as well. So hopefully this relaxes some of you and you learn something new out of it. So enjoy. Alright. First thing is 70%, some say 71% of the Earth is in fact covered by ocean water. Now, this is false on a sense of, I should have used a blue pencil. It probably looks blue now, but I'm wearing my ocean shirt. It's like palm trees and people on it fishing and ocean water. But on a scale of the actual globe itself, we're talking about strictly surface coverage. Okay? If you were to visualize land, mass, and the surface of the water, we're not talking about the inner layers of the Earth. We're not talking about below the crust. If you talk about all that, the water is like such a minimal amount of the actual Earth that it's almost hilariously irrelevant. And like if you were to shine like a sun right next to it for like a second, I think a split second, all of that water would just evaporate. So that's how tiny of a portion it is. But speaking of surface coverage, it does cover 70 to 71%. Now the moon does impact. Okay, so now it's time to draw. I gotta give you the visuals, okay? Let's draw our little Earth here, okay? This is not to scale, but here is the Earth, okay? So I gotta draw some of the land mass. Here's Canada, and North America, South America. I'm just, again, totally butchering this. There's Europe and there's some of Africa, okay? And maybe some of Australia there. Now there is the moon, which I probably should get closer. This stuff has always just been so fascinating to me, and I love learning new things. And so here's the moon. So if I'm mistaken on any of this, please, for heaven's sake, correct me. So there's the moon with its Swiss cheese looking craters. And that distance would be like, I think 230,000 miles. Right? And then here's the sun, which again, totally not to scale, but it's so big it can't even fit on this page. So it's like it's even bigger than that. Like it would more be like like more like that. Unimaginably large if it were this close to it, but 93 million miles. So imagine that. But both to impact the currents. Okay, they tug and pull on each other, and as this one orbits around this one, and as this one orbits around this one, on different sides, it kind of creates a sort of wobbling effect. So it's constantly moving, and I'm going to go into that later, how the ocean is not actually flat, but it is more oblong in shape, right? We're so used to seeing moons and different planets that don't have water on them, which is most of the planets out there that we can see. They don't have that sort of, I want to say, squamous shape, like a strange, like if you were to actually look at it, that would be more close in resemblance to the shape rather than the typical perfect circle we see online. Actually, that's not even a perfect circle. It would probably be more close to that. But yeah, this is pretty accurate. And that's because of tugging and pulling action. And the planet itself is, if you strip all the water away, really uneven. It's not as obvious. But if you were to look at it up close, there are definitely differences. So, alright, enough about that. Let's go back to my facts. So, the oceans are changing due to climate. There is a huge weather system that impacts things, and it is all based upon the ocean. And again, I'll go into that later. But basically, it's not only that the ocean changes the weather, thus the climate, but the impact of that climate that's forming is changing the oceans. So it's like cause and effect. What the ocean is putting out there is coming back to it, unfortunately. And that is mostly man-made cause. But it is also impacted by, okay, this is not a fact, and I cannot say mostly, because no one really knows, but this could be mostly triggered by the Earth's natural cycles and changes, how it goes through ice age, and then it doesn't. It goes through exceptionally warmer periods, such as, I suppose, the Jurassic Age. So this is bound to repeat as a natural planetary cycle. Is it going to be hospitable for humans? Millions of years from now? Definitely not. Thousands of years from now? Perhaps now. But we don't know when the next cycle is, and some say it is forming now because of the magnetic pole shift. But it is definitely showing signs of rapid change. However, the panic mode is sort of not really there yet in terms of a lot of aspects. But again, I'm going to go into it later with the ice sheets and all that. But yeah, just so you know, the oceans are the major cause of climate. You need water to form clouds and precipitation, so. And there's a lot impacting, like earthquakes and volcanic activity. It goes underneath the oceans, and it's a whole chain cycle. Now, the oceans do have warm surface currents that are on the surface of the water, which is why water is warmer on the surface. If you ever notice, you swim somewhere, let's say in the Gulf of Mexico, you'll actually notice that a lot. And cold, deep currents. So the water is naturally colder underground. Imagine living on the second floor of a house. In the summer it gets really hot, needs more air conditioning, sometimes a fan in your bedroom. And then you go down to your basement or your cellar and it's really cold. That's why the heat usually rises and the cold likes to stay down and trap itself, because cold is denser. So the air particles that have a colder temperature stay close together. Like when you're cold, you tense up, and when you're hot, you expand. So the expansion rises and is lighter and floats because the warmer air particles, yeah. Particles, yeah, I'm just gonna draw like a toilet with some atoms in it. They tend to shift upwards, okay, so, you know what, I'll draw it so you get a clear image in your head, but, so those currents, warm above, cold below, they run what we call the Atlantic current, and the Gulf Stream is a part of this current. And this current, which is natural part of the Earth cycle, it has slowed down 15% over the last century, and it is impacting the climate. And it has something to do with El Nino, which I don't know too much of, so I won't go into, but basically what that is the weather pattern of the warmer pockets of current, that when they expand and there are more warmer pockets, then that will determine what areas become more deserty and dry and which areas have more rainfall, because one thing impacts the other. So let me show you now. I'll draw this on the other side. Don't want to waste too much paper. So, you know what? I'm going to have to draw an expanded version, but again, here is the poor illustration of our planet. Okay. So, oh, girl, you can't even see that? Oh my gosh, that is such a bad... I feel like the light doesn't really give it justice. You don't even know what's water and what's land. Okay, so this is water, and that's land, okay? No, wait, yeah, that's water. Let me draw this. Water, land, water, water. I think I made it clear enough. But basically, let's say there's a warm pocket here that's about this size. So we're going to name it P for pocket. When they discovered this area is expanding, let's say it's about this warm now. This was, let's say, 2017, and this is 2018. Because we don't know what's yet of 2019. Well, actually, technically we do. Anyway, let's look back in the past. So, 2017, let's say, was noticeably smaller. This has nothing to do with the actual study, but this is just an example. And here's 2018. 2018 was much larger, so that largerness has an impact elsewhere. And as the currents go, again, I don't know their exact drawings, but they tend to go like this and like this, and you know, they go like one after the other. They have their own cycles and patterns. And so when this warm pocket goes here in the UK, which is causing hotter summers for you guys lately, that cold air, that cold current has to go somewhere. And because that warmness is evaporating all that water from, per se, the Gulf, which I can tell you is really warm since February. I mean, not the water, but the temperature itself, warmer than usual. So that travels, let's say, this way with the current, right? And it's impacting you guys in this area of Europe. So that cold water has to go somewhere. So typically, I mean, it's going to go where it needs to, but that warm air is now being pushed here, and then it has to go somewhere, right? So it's being pushed up here, melting the ice, and then that cold travels here, making, let's say, the Northeast colder than usual. And then all of a sudden, it's making parts that are usually warm and cold. And then because of that cold, it is causing more rain to accumulate in this area because the currents are being pushed, just how a hurricane would go this way from this part of Africa, right? So it is all connected. And so now because that rainfall is there, where does it have to go? Oh, all of a sudden, it's not going in the areas that need water. All of a sudden, these areas are dry. There's usually A and B effects. So one area that's really wet, moist, and all of a sudden another area near that vicinity is really dry because it's being depleted of its much needed precipitation. And so Now, because that area is dry, all of a sudden it's impacting life there. There's no precipitation, nothing to evaporate here. And because of that, other areas suffer, and now they become more deserty, because had that been receiving the right amount of water, it would have carried it to the other necessary parts. And now, because that part is not getting enough, it might be impacted 2 times by another heat current here. And so that area suffers completely and depletes itself. And then all of a sudden the cold cycle begins again. So whenever there is heat, the cold leaves. Whenever there is cold, the heat comes. So it's kind of like that kind of a current cycle. It's quite hard to explain, but it does create cause and effect. So when people say climate change is not here because one area is really hot and one area is really cold, it's ignorant to say, because these drastic extremes should not be occurring, but they are happening in more frequency and more intensity. All of a sudden, one year we'll have 110 summers, and then the next we'll have 112, and then the colder areas will have -50, and then the next year they have -55, and because of that drastic change, the colder one area is, the hotter area will become in the hotter areas. The hotter the area will become the hotter areas. And because the hotter area becomes warmer, that will impact the colder area to become colder. And so it will make it just worse over time. That was way too long. Alright. So let's see here. So I hope that is beginning to make sense. So evaporation creates rain clouds and storm systems. So the ocean has a humongous influence, if not the overall major one. The ocean thankfully absorbs most of the CO2, the carbon dioxide that is emitted. Instead of going into the atmosphere, it is soaked into the oceans. I think 28 times more than the atmosphere. There's a lot of it. It's increasing the acidity levels. The pH right now is probably in the low 8 points. And it's just getting lower and lower, and it's eventually going to become acidic if this cycle continues. And it's affecting the marine life. The marine life cannot live in, most marine life I can imagine cannot live in that much acidity. So the pH must be balanced to a decently neutral level, just above neutral. I think that was in the 7 range, 7.5, and then the basic begins pretty much at 8 and beyond. So the melting of the ice caps are occurring more faster, more frequently. Chunks are falling, waterfalls are forming. If you've ever seen those cliffs, unlike those planet shows, it looks really cool, but it's actually not cool because it's rising the sea levels. But not as much as you would anticipate, because again, if one area has a tendency to warm up, guess what? If the South Pole is melting, the North might be freezing more, but actually the North is pretty much gone. So, and they've discovered recently that Antarctica is melting away 6 times faster than anticipated from about the 1970s. So that's a humongous change. And there are humongous chunks of ice waiting to fall off, and they are miles in size. I mean, they are massive. They are forming cracks, and let me show you again in the picture. But yeah, I've been wanting to do this video about the oceans for a while, but I purposely waited until it was more reasonable to talk about subjects like climate change, because it's now beginning to be more noticeable than it was before when I originally intended to make this video, and I didn't want to sound ignorant. So let's say here's Antarctica. So it depends on what way you look at it, what way you turn the globe. It has different shapes. Okay, so depending on which which direction you turn it, it's going to have a different looking shape. Let's say it's like this. Okay, I know there's one tail. Alright. And so overall this is mostly composed of ice. However, there are definitely land formations underneath that are not typically seen. So when all of this melts away, then there will be its own, unknown to me but known to scientists, continent shape. Okay. And so, let's say this little chunk is going to fall off anytime soon. That looks, you know what, let's not do that. Let's let's go like this. Yeah, that chunk. Okay. Let's redraw that. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm really mature. Okay, so let's say that chunk falls off. It may not look significant, but that can actually rise the levels about, let's say, a meter or two, you know. And it may not be significant, but in areas that tend to have typical coastal flooding, they tend to have this more frequent problem of worrying about whether it's going to rise or not. So those areas will definitely have a larger impact. For example, where I live, they say it's about only 7 feet above sea level. So were that to rise even just 2 meters, that would already be a significant problem and frequent damage. So were that to fall off, per se, even that little tiny amount, it may create a devastating impact. And that, again, is not nearly to scale. But again, perhaps not, because if that happens, then well, it's hard to say, because then if you raise the sea level, then you're melting more ice around because the sea level is raised. So it's actually a more devastating effect. So let's just hope that doesn't happen at all. Okay. That means more water to evaporate, which means more rain to melt and warmer air to circulate. Yikes. Alright, so see how it's adding up now? I in no way mean at all to create this sort of mongering process of instilling fear in people. This is just information that I've collected and is occurring, and somehow humans will move away from coastlines that are receding and continue to live their lives. Let's see here. So yes. And another interesting fact is the oceans are actually as old, approximately, as Earth. They were formulated about 4 billion years ago, and the Earth was about 5. So, shaving a billion years off, it's pretty much as old if you look at it in a long-range perspective. 5% of it has only been explored, and the other 95 are unknown. And this 5% is fully explored, so they know every nook and cranny of it, basically, all the specimens that left there and what is contained in those regions. Which is really nothing. I'm surprised it hasn't increased by now. People don't care to, I guess. I mean, it's economically speaking, it's very costly to go navigate, and perhaps even dig if you were to possibly do that. It's just too much money and not enough budget. But yeah, flooding is undeniable, and it is definitely going to occur in other regions like it always has been for humanity's history, as we all know it. Certain areas tend to get it, and then it recedes, it subsides, I should say, and then it goes back to normal, like Louisiana. But there are definitely places that will not recover from that, and maybe someday when the glaciers freeze over again, they form their and then thus with the movement of the plates underneath landmass. And I actually want to go into that because I don't think I explained myself very well. I have a picture I may draw, but may not do it justice. But basically, there are different plates. So there's one here and one below, and so they move like this constantly. Okay. And as this one goes up, this one goes under. So it's kind of like that, if you were to think about movement. And this one goes into the mantle of the earth, and then that mantle has to go somewhere. So that mantle comes up as this form and creates new land. So the oceans are constantly in cycles with this movement. So the water's like just in between here, and when this kind of moves too fast or creates like an earthquake or something, or volcanic activity, and then the magma appears out under it, it creates more land, and it creates a wave causing a tsunami typically in the water, and then flooding different land masses, and then when it recedes, everything goes back to normal. But this has something to do with the currents, this movement, as well as the moon and sun's tidal structure. The way it's tidally locked with the earth in orbit does impact the currents and the cycles, as well as the axis of the earth and how it's tilted and shaped, as well as the weather patterns that are caused as an effect of these movements combined. So, and with that, the continents move as well. So that's why they always shift and mountains are formed and all that. But I won't draw that. That has nothing to do with this, pretty much. Well, kind of, but 97% of Earth's water is in the oceans. So the oceans are the Arctic, the Southern, the Indian, the Pacific, and the Atlantic. And so thus 3% are rivers, seas, lakes, ponds, our drinking water, all that. Only 3%. All life began in the oceans. Of course, you probably learned growing up that the basic components of life developed in the water as different, how do you say this? Sort of like jellyfish, but different sea life. The mammals didn't start until much later, but there were little strands of cellular organisms floating around for many, many years before it actually became advanced enough to structure into other beings, skeletal beings. But it didn't start on land, definitely in water. Many sea plants and animals produce light, so they're glow in the dark, they're bioluminescent. So many of these that are actually in the deeper levels where the light doesn't penetrate, they produce this light, I suppose, to see each other and perhaps see themselves in the darkness. So they can be known to other creatures around. Maybe they want to avoid them, or, well, it could be a bad thing too, because then they could be preyed on easier if they glow. Unless they have night vision. But yeah, so light basically doesn't go through past about 200 meters in the water, so it's pretty dark beyond that, and you can only see green. Like if there was something red in that depth of water beyond, I think it was 100 meters, that you can only see green, so your blood would look green under that much water. And blue is no longer, I think, a hue as well. The reason blue is in the sky and the ocean is because of the formulation of oxygen and how the light shines upon the color rays. Otherwise, it would perhaps be red because, or no, I'm sorry. Yeah, red, because the ocean itself actually absorbs red light, so you don't really see red light even beyond that depth of water. It's really freaky. I suppose that's why water typically does have a bluish green hues, especially in some deeper parts. So, yeah. 1 liter of seawater has 38,000 microbials in it. Okay, so everything has life. If you scoop up a liter of seawater and look in it, you're going to see all of those little microbes floating around in there. It's not just water, it's not just salt. 3.5% of the ocean is salt. So that is actually a lot if you think about it. Like if you were to scoop up all that water in the ocean and put it somewhere in like a container and then take out the salt and then dump the salt over a landmass, like that would probably cover, I don't know, most of the United States, like just in salt. And like 500 feet of it, yeah, that would be a lot. Okay, so there are 17,000 species that live underwater without sunlight, so they don't get any form of sunlight and they can still survive. This confused scientists for a while because they initially thought that all life needed sunlight, but that was proved irrelevant because they discovered many, many creatures, 17,000 to be exact, can live in the depths of the ocean without needing sunlight. So they produce their own form of light, as I mentioned earlier, and through actually not only that, but they gather their life force within the warm, how do I say this? They're warm tides or springs underneath the ocean that come up and give life to those creatures. So different, perhaps, bacteria they need, maybe algae. I don't think algae can live that deep, but this warmth energy that is in the earth gives them life as well. So in a sense, the earth itself from the inside is giving it life, and so is the sun from above downwards. The Pacific Ocean is the deepest one, and the Arctic is the shallowest one. Okay, so Arctic being by North Pole, Pacific between Asia, Western North America, Western South America, and Australia on the east side. The blue whale is the largest animal. They've discovered one that was like an 11-story building. It was, I think, 33 meters tall. And these blue whales actually swim all over the planet. They go everywhere, and because they're so enormous, they can just go anywhere they choose. And they are not usually prey to anyone because they're so large. The red tide that I actually spoke about in a video once is formed through algae growth. And this algae growth, when it accumulates through warmer climate, like I said, from the warmer currents, it tends to kill off most of marine life and creates devastation. So this is seasonal, and it tends to typically occur in warmer climate areas. And it has a foul smell when all the sea life dies. There are 1 to 3 million sea ships that have sunk in the oceans, and less than 1% of them were salvaged. So can you imagine all the gold that must be hiding within? Geological discoveries to see oceans are under Earth's surfaces as well as much as our oceans. So there's actually pretty much just as much of ocean water above the surface as there is below, which I've kind of always known. There is definitely way more to the Earth's crust than you can possibly imagine, but the reason it doesn't really evaporate is because it's kind of trapped in there, and some of it leaks into our current ocean stream. So that's where the life comes through, where it actually produces life for these beings that don't live in sunlight. And it has nowhere to go and evaporate. Like if it's hot down there because of the magma, it's probably just bubbling and boiling away, but it evaporates and then it comes back down in the cave walls, perhaps. I don't know how that works, but I can imagine there's definitely a lot of that under there as well. I mean, let me draw this. crust would be about... I don't think that's nearly an accurate description. Okay, let's say this is the deepest level of the ocean, okay? The crust would be like that wide compared to that, okay? So let's say this is like 40,000 feet and this is like God knows how low. So that's the crust. So there's a whole nother pocket of ocean living underneath this. Not in all areas, but many of them. And then this is where the first upper layer of magma is, and it's God knows how deep. I'm not going to draw that, it won't fit on the page. But that kind of gives you a visual perception of it. And obviously when you go down here, there cannot possibly be water formed because it's so warm down there. It will just like disintegrate instantly. Alright, so I pretty much covered that. Lightning is known to hit dry land more frequently than sea. But when it does hit the sea, the electricity electrocutes marine life all around where it hit. So, poor fish, but lucky for them, they get hit less often. Which is again surprising because most of Earth is covered by water, but I suppose with our new day and age technology, perhaps lightning is just more drawn to us. Deepest ocean the deepest part of the ocean is the Marianas Trench, and it is 36,000 feet deep. That is about as high as airlines. Most Mount Everest's height can fit and still leave about 5,000 feet above it. That's how deep it is. The pressure at the bottom of the trench is 1,000 times at the surface. Death. Yet sea life can still live there. Like, oh my god. Californian tourists spend $75 billion a year just to visit the ocean. Wow, people love water. If all the gold was salvaged from the sea, everyone on Earth would have 9 pounds of it. And that is perhaps counting that which is naturally there and those 1 to 3 million approximately undiscovered, unsalvaged sea ships that have quadrillions of dollars worth of gold. 15% of the water is covered by sea ice. So I suppose they calculate the oceans, a part of it being the ice, because ice is able to melt into water or turn into gas at any moment, and thus fall back as forms of precipitation. So if you think about it, the ocean is technically, they even consider part of it what is waiting to fall down in the atmosphere. Interesting. Sound travels 4 times quicker in water. It's actually 4.3 times specifically. So that's why divers get really confused when they're in there. Like, they don't know how far something is, because sound will travel like super quickly to you, and then you're like, whoa, where did that come from? You know, I thought they were way over there, but I could hear them here, you know, and you can't really hear that much in water anyway, but anyway. And I guess that's how they determine how fast a tsunami may come or where an earthquake was, because of the sound waves that pick up in the radar. And they also determine it by the shakes as well. But they have to put that in their calculations. Divers must resurface slowly above to avoid bubbles forming in their tissues and blood. You've probably heard of the expression, your blood boiling. Yeah, that literally happens when you resurface from lower depths very quickly. You don't give your body enough time to neutralize from the surface tension and the atmospheric pressure, and so it overwhelms the body, and it's trying to build up what's not there too quickly, if that makes sense. And actually, they say diving is much safer than traveling in most mobile things like cars and all that stuff. So the ocean is not flat. As mentioned earlier, there's kind of a bubbly shape to it. It's very non-uniform, unless you're, of course, a flat earther. Nothing wrong with that, just a belief system. So if you want to be really isolated from everyone else, there is a place called Point Nemo, and it is 1,670 miles from land, the farthest point that you can ever go away from any land surface. And I think there was an island they also considered, like a population of 200-something people. They usually get their supplies like once a week, I think, from ship, and it's so isolated, like there's nowhere to go. Such a small place. And so if you think about it, it's between, I think, Australia and South America, if I'm not mistaken. That point they've determined is the most isolated from any source of land, any human being. You feel drunk due to the change in nitrogen levels, I suppose, in your body when you go that deep. When you swim at 100 feet below sea level, so it's about 30 meters or so, 33 meters, you start to feel drunk. And I don't know if that continues. I think maybe that's only at that level, and then when you go deeper, it probably goes away. Who knows? If you can go deeper, it's probably going to crush your lungs. Unless you have a good tank. Life is restricted to the oceans for 3 billion years. So for 3 billion years, there was just life in the oceans. No land, nothing. It was just strictly in the water until the first being crawled out. The amphibian, reptilian sort of. It started with underwater breathers and land breathers, but then it formed into land breathers. Great Barrier Reef System is seen from the moon. That's how large it is. And there is a process called coral bleaching, which occurs when the water gets too warm. The coral has to be in just the right amount of temperature, and they take a long time to form, so that's why they say don't step on one or damage it. That thing took so long to make. And I was going to say earlier, divers have actually went much deeper than 100 feet, but they've had special tanks to do that. Or equipment, like pods that actually carry you much, much deeper. There's world records for that. Alright, so half of the O2, oxygen, breathed is produced in the ocean. So half the oxygen, half the air you breathe is made from the ocean. Thank you, ocean. 20% of the floor of the ocean is covered by corals. And corals, again, really are just tiny, porous, limestone, skeletal animals. And they stiffen up and harden when they die down and make corals. The Bahamas contain the largest underwater cliffs, some I think as large as 4,000 meters. The Mid-Oceanic Ridge, which is the world's longest mountain chain underwater, is 40,300 miles, about 65,000 kilometers long. If you stretched all of the Earth's oceanic ridges, not just the mid one, it will wrap around the globe 2 times. Okay. Some sea life have antifreeze in their system in cold waters to prevent them from freezing, such as in the Arctic Ocean. So they naturally produce antifreeze. That's cool. Mauna Kea is the world's tallest mountain, and it is in the Pacific Ocean. So, the world's tallest mountain is not Mount Everest after all. It's in the ocean. How mind-blowing, mind-boggling that is. There is a trash pile larger than 2 times the size of Texas floating in the Pacific Ocean as its own little continent. Thanks, humans. Thanks. The Pacific Ocean is shrinking and the Atlantic Ocean is growing because of that tectonic plate movement, and I don't think I demonstrated it well enough, so because of the purpose of triggers, I am going to try. So, here we go. Let's say, did I depict this correctly? Yeah, let's just say I did. No, I don't think I did. Yes, I did. Okay. Alright, so let's say that's one line formation that's going in this way. And then this one is going above. Alright? So it's going to continue going down that way. And this one is just going down. So this is going that way, and this land is going this way. And then there's like water. Okay. And this is air, earth, whatever. And this is the crust. So what was I saying? What point was I on? Right, so because of this action of movement, it is creating the continents to move out. As the continents move closer together, like North, South America, Africa, and Europe, they're getting closer. They're getting further apart. And then the other side, when you look at Asia, Australia, North and South America, they're getting closer together. So as you see in Pangea, the continents at one point, I think 200 million years ago, were all one supercontinent. And so they've recently, in terms of 5 billion year history, 200 million years is recent, separated and formed the continents we know today. And so they are eventually going to combine together, and the Atlantic Ocean will be no more. The Pacific Ocean. I keep getting them mixed up. Yeah, so Europe is getting further away from the United States if you live here. And then if you live in Australia, then Chile is getting closer to you, pretty much. So it's kind of hard to think about because you also have to think about the Earth as a globe. And so, no shade, but the Earth is a globe, not flat. And so it is hard to visualize depending on which direction you look at, because if you live in the southern hemisphere, then all of a sudden what is north to me is south to you, and the climate is different depending on, like now it's getting to be winter for you guys in Australia and summer here, so it's difficult to speak about warmer climate when now it's getting colder there, so makes your head spin. What is up, what is down? We really don't know. We just base it off where you live. That's it. There's really no direction. We just base it based on where the north point of the globe is and where the south point is. And where the south point is for me could be the north point for you. So, just whatever. These are my notes. But yeah, basically, the oceans are heating 40% faster than predicted. So that is my final point, for a reason to make you all aware that we have been supposedly self-inflicting this damage to the earth and thus to each other and our home for very long, and part of it, or most of it, or a little of it, depending on your perspective. Again, this is not a fact, but has has been occurring either through our cause or through the Earth's cause, but the Earth's cause could be through our cause. You see how everything's connected. So it just makes you realize how precious the water is and how it impacts. 14% of your proteins come from fish alone, and so I think it's important to keep this life, 2 to 4 times the amount of shrimp captured are actually thrown away. So, yeah, we're very nitpicky beings. I know for our health, we don't want to eat perhaps bad shrimp or high in different mercury levels or something, but I'm talking about other fish, not just shrimp. But there's so much trash, there's so much dumping, there's so much, sometimes even unnecessary things we throw away that we don't even acknowledge that are in a trash bin that could be reused, like certain materials that cannot decompose, that we can use for something else instead. And I know there's different programs out there that you can actually send all your stuff like that, like cardboards, plastics, etc. The non-biodegradable ones, and then they will make something of it, like furniture for people who need it, or clothing. And it's definitely able to be reused and reused and reused and reused without degrading for centuries. So that's something to think about. And the plastic bottles are a big thing because people use them a lot and they're just being thrown in. It takes like 450 years to degrade, and so it's ironic because you get water from them, yet you're damaging the water by using them. And so get something like a Brita filter or something, those reusable mugs that you just carry everywhere you go and fill from a filtration system, and you should be just fine. But you may not think you yourself have one impact, but you do, as you are part of this whole process. And so were you to help humanity, you would be acknowledging of this and these facts and some facts.